A new scientific paper labelled The Talking Dead has shed new light on the cultural practices of the earliest humans of Southeast Asia. Australian National University's Dr. Sofia Samper-Carro is the author of the paper, and she joins me now. Sofia, let's start with your team's amazing discovery on Alor Island in Indonesia. What exactly did you find?
Well, it was, as you just said, it was a really exciting discovery. So what we found was 3 different burials that each of them were from a different time period, but they were all in the same, exactly in the same kind of rock shelter and in the same position. So it was really interesting to find these 3 different burials that we know they are dated to different periods, but all located in specifically the same rock shelter.
And what state were the bones in, given the huge amount of time they'd been there?
Well, they were pretty good, I would say. I've seen worse, I would say. So they were quite good, and that gave us the opportunity to study their living conditions before we found them in the burials.
How could you verify the timing, the exact years of how long they were there for?
Well, what we use is what is called relative chronology. So what we usually use is material that we find in the same archaeological context. So, for example, charcoal, or sometimes we can date the teeth from the individuals or some artifacts that are related to the individual. So, for example, ornaments, things that we know they kind of belong to the same individual. So we get a date from that material, and then we can kind of extrapolate to the burial and how old they are.
So what are we learning from all of this? Tell us why the discovery was so significant to our understanding of the early human population in the region.
They are showing us different cultural practices. So they are showing us how these different communities were burying their dead people, right? Their relatives, we assume. And to me, that tells us a lot about the society, because the way we look after our relatives, or the way we buried these people that were important for us, I believe it tells a lot about how people behave, what kind of social constructions we have, what type of cultural beliefs we have. So what was really interesting was to find that each of these burials represent a different type of burial, right? So one of them was buried in a way that they removed some of the bones, but they left some of them in the ground, let's say, or they buried some of them and the other ones were removed. Another one was buried in a seated position, so they somehow managed to wrap the body to make it sit before they bury it. And the bottom one, she was buried on the oldest one, the 13,000-year-old one. She was buried on the side, but also with all these ornaments, with fish hooks, all these really valuable artifacts that obviously inform us on how important this person would have been for that community or that group.
Well, it was published in a scientific journal, PLOS ONE, but you called it The Talking Dead. Why was that?
Well, because I wanted to make this, to share this idea of these burials, the dead people, dead individuals at the end, they are talking to us. They are telling us, giving us information on how they were living. So that's why I call it The Talking Dead.
And what did you learn about the migratory nature of the people during the Pleistocene to the Holocene periods?
So what I found really interesting was when I started looking at how they were buried, I could see that this type of burials, they happen in different islands around Alor, so in other Indonesian islands, or in mainland Southeast Asia, for example, but it happened in different time periods. And some of them seem to come, let's say, east to west. So this tradition seems to come from PNG, or what was in the time Sahul, so coming from the east towards mainland Southeast Asia, while some of these traditions, they appear earlier in mainland Southeast Asia, and then we find them in the islands. Then we compare this information from the burials, from the cultural practices, to what we know from the genetics. And it kind of confirm or support our idea of there is this, the island Southeast Asia was this area where people were moving east, west, west, east, going around and migrating and sharing or bringing with them all this knowledge and all these practices.